Would like to call our meeting to order. Today is Thursday, December 14th, 2017, 1 p.m. This is the Code Enforcement Officers Advisory Committee meeting, which is a public meeting. So with that said, we'll start with the roll call. Teresa Adrian, presiding officer, present. Richard Adams.
Present.
Jennifer Bernal.
Present.
Matthew Christensen.
Present.
Crystal Miles.
Present.
Stuart Walker.
Present.
Okay. So I believe that we have an agenda item, training for advisory committee members, but we are going to forego that agenda item today as everybody on the panel today has attended the required training. So the next agenda item will be public comment. Do we have anybody here with public comment? Okay. So we'll go on and get to our staff reports. The first item is the executive office.
Yes, Madam Chair and board members, I'm Nick Voinis of TDLR. And first off, welcome to TDLR. Proud and happy to have you guys join our family. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service to Texas. Also want to introduce to you Carla James, our Deputy Director. And okay. But so I'm here to bring you an executive staff report, kind of a summary of what's been going on around the agency. It's been a busy 2017, to say the least, since state lawmakers have gone home, so to speak, after their 85th legislative session, which started in January, and we had a special session over the summer. TDLR staff's been busy implementing the bills and the legislation that they passed during that time and even before. All TDLR divisions are involved and have been involved in the process, which includes developing rules, communicating to stakeholders, appointing and prepping advisory boards like yourselves, hiring additional staff, and dealing with education, exams, IT programs, and more. As a majority of the work's been completed, but this process will continue as we implement programs into 2018 and 2019. As for new programs, on May 29th, Governor Abbott signed HB 100 into law, immediately brought oversight of the state's transportation network companies to TDLR. On September 1, we picked up the state's podiatrist, and on November 1, we added 6 more health-related programs from the Department of State Health Services, phase 2 of the 13 total programs that were granted to us 2 years ago. So in addition to adding code enforcement officers like yourselves, we now have massage therapists, laser hair removal, sanitarians, mold assessors and remediators, and offender education programs. And next September, we'll add the state's behavioral analysts. I want to also mention that as we add programs granted to us by the legislature, lawmakers have also deregulated 5 of our programs since 2003, and will deregulate at least another 4 over the next 2 years. So we recommended that action after our strategic planning process, which included public and industry feedback. The legislature agreed that the licensing requirement for these programs were unnecessary and burdensome, and doing without them posed little or no risk to consumer protection. Briefly mentioned that our every other year strategic planning will be going through that important process again this spring of 2018. This fall, TDLR staff worked hard to help our licensees and small businesses along the coastal area recover from the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. In coordination with the governor's office and their Rebuild Texas efforts, we've been implementing procedures to assist all eligible licensees in the affected areas to help them recover and return to work as quickly as possible by removing the burden of red tape. Our Harvey focus now is on the rebuild by protecting small business and consumers avoid unlicensed activity and ensuring that they receive quality work for their hard-earned dollars. Information on all this can be found on our website, tdlr.texas.gov, and the Governor's Rebuild Texas site. But back to our site for a minute, I wanted to share with you some recent web traffic associated with this program. So over the last 30 days since your site has gone live, Your website had 3,966 page views. That's an average of about 132 per day. Most of those visitors accessed the site from a desktop computer. 73% of them did so in their offices off their desktop computer, while 21% did so from a smartphone and 6% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting your site, number one are forms, followed by CE and exam information, laws and rules, FAQs, frequently asked questions, as well as advisory board information. Also wanted to add that we're always looking at our websites to make them better and more user-friendly than they are currently, but any feedback you guys have for us, or please pass them along. In addition, we are active in social media, so please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter to keep up with TDLR events, activities, news, so on. So thank you, and would you like to add anything?
Madam Chair, members, thank you so much for your service to Texas. We're excited to have you. Wanted to give you a little bit of information or reiterate a little bit of information from the summits that you attended, and that is that our staff is here to assist you. We are your agency as well. Christine is your pipeline to the agency, so anything you need, contact her. She'll pinch me later for saying that. But the folks that you see in this room are here to assist you in any way that we can. You're our eyes and ears on the street. No pun intended. We know that you're code enforcement officers. And make sure that you get what you need from us so that you can conduct your business in your highly paid job with TDLR. And I think that's all I've got for now. We'll be providing some guidance as the meeting goes on this afternoon. And certainly if you have any questions, Mary and Doug are here to assist in that. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, the next agenda item will be the Compliance Division.
Chair, advisory board members, before you today for the compliance report, you have David Gonzalez, the Business and Building Section Manager, and
Stuart Meyer from Health and Medical Professions.
so I begin my report with an apology. I'm so sorry that I was not able to participate in the summit that occurred. I was busy doing some public outreach, which is one of the activities we'll be going through, but glad to see some familiar faces and very happy to be presenting this report to you and giving the compliance report. So compliance division here at TDLR is the safety solutions and specialist people. That's our mantra. We serve the role of research, being the subject matter experts. If there's a complex problem or a complex issue that one of our other division needs help with, whether it's licensing, customer service, maybe a customer service phone call came in and they don't know the answer right off the top of their head because it's a new program for us, they'll come to us to do that research. I'm actually learning the program. This past year, I've been traveling quite a bit, learning a lot from the individuals that have been participating for years, and actually my counterpart, Mr. Myrick, has been teaching me a lot about the history of what's been going on before it came to TDLR. So very excited that we continue to serve in that role in compliance. The reason we're here, Senate Bill 202, 13 programs had to be transferred. This was part of Phase 2. As Mr. Nick conveyed, there was other programs that came along with us. On November 1st, we started with the code enforcement here at TDLR. It was a big deal. It was a year in the planning. I have to give kudos to my counterpart in the medical professions, Mr. Stephen Mills, and his staff that came over, did a phenomenal job, in my opinion. This is internally, me talking about TDLR, but he had to get accustomed to TDLR processes. We were learning from them as how they did their processes and the programs, and he did such a wonderful job integrating it into the TDLR culture and the processes that we already had established. It was not a individual effort. He had people from the programming division, IT section, customer service, general counsel. Everybody was represented at the table in order to get this job done, and they met regularly, periodic meetings, find out where we were making progress, if we needed to do something better, whether it was review forms, FAQs, plan for some programming glitches that may have come up. Stephen Mills and his crew were on top of it, and again, I was learning from that process, so very proud of how they were able to get that done. The go-live date, November 1st, was also an exciting time. They actually had a room dedicated in our executive office where they were going to count how many phone calls came in, how many emails came in. kind of raises the level of awareness for everybody and gets you excited. But 2,300 licensees, obviously, were being transferred over. We needed to make sure that on that very first day, they would be able to see their name up on our website. They were obviously used to going to DSHS. We would need to make sure that they could, find what the requirements are rules-wise. All those things need to work, and I think we're successful at that. The jury's still out. If there's problems, I think we contacted some of the associations representation out there to find out, are we doing everything the way that we think we are? And so far, we've heard that it's a pretty good job so far. The big deal for our compliance division is that we're the face of the program. For most of our programs here at the agency, we're the ones that you get to meet with, talk with, you grab our cards, you can always call us if there's any problems, and we do the public outreach. I was not able to attend the summit because I was doing public outreach. I have backup in both Katie Bryce, who I have to give lots of kudos to because she helped me on presentations that had conflicting dates, and then of course Mr. Stuart Myrick also here to help with those presentations as well. If you look at the second part of the compliance report, you'll see a list of all the different places we've been to. I can tell you that I think we did well enough because we're already booked for some of those places for next year. They asked us to come back, so I hope that's a good sign that we're doing our job, and I would like to make sure y'all know that we are available as much as you need us. We do have some limitations on staff, but if you can get us some numbers, if you got people, 30, 50 people, we've done smaller presentations as well, but we're looking to get the best bang for our buck and make the best use of our resources. So if you need us out there to talk about code enforcement officers, obviously my name's first on the list. Stuart's my backup. I think that's all I had to share for you all today. Mr. Stewart, anything else that I'm forgetting? Oh, yeah, there you go.
So as David mentioned, my name is Stuart Myrick. I'm in the compliance division with the medical and health professions. And as David echoed, we're here to serve you. We're here to help you. Give you a little bit of history for those that may not be aware of it. The Code Enforcement Officer registration was created via passage of House Bill 1257. That was in the 72nd Texas Legislature, went into effect September 1st, 1991. At that time, it was assigned to what was then the Texas Department of Health, which is now the Texas Department of State Health Services, or Health and Human Services Commission. It remained there until November 1st of this year, when it transferred here. And during its time at the Department of Health, Department of State Health Services, other than codification in 2001, recodification, there were no real substantive changes to the statute during its time at the health department. So, and as David mentioned, we're here to help you. Anything we can do. I will say this, as David mentioned, integrating it into TDLR. Going back from when I was the director of the program at DSHS, it was a one-man shop. In fact, I think I may have received emails from every one of you regarding continuing education. But that was also in addition to other programs I was running, doing, all that good stuff. So it's kind of nice to have resources where, they can come to me, they can come to David, and, get our expertise, get our help, and we can give them help and give you guys the best possible service possible. So, any questions?
Questions? No.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next staff report will be on the Education and Examination Division.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination Division. If you guys did not, I know you guys had a lot to absorb during this our advisory board summit, but just to short recap, we have 3 sections in our division. The Education, Examination, and School Services section. We oversee and look at a lot of the pre-education, course curriculum review, continuing education approval of CE courses and providers. Some of the programs we don't approve the courses and providers. We just accept them as yours. We accept those as so long that they meet the requirements within the rule. We have another section which is a school inspection and site visits. We do school inspections. Those are who provide a pre-education for license types such as cosmetology, barber, and massage therapy, those type of industries. And we also have another section that talks about and deals with the driver education and driving safety and offender education. And that also includes the responsible pet owners that recently passed. So any offense to a pet, they would have to take a course on that. So those are some of the things we regulate. With the code enforcement, we'll have a lot of commerce with our division with the examination and the continuing education part of it, okay? So far, we have administered, since the inception of the program, 18 examinations, and 12 of them have passed. We're looking at a 66% pass rate. When you start seeing these pass rates in our report, don't be alarmed don't focus on that percentage, because you're going to have at least 50 people or more for that percentage to mean anything. Okay, when you have a small program, you have like 2 people take the exam, and 1 fail, 1 pass, 50% pass rate. Oh my God, you know, it doesn't say much, right? So just be aware of that, and you'll see in the report that in the back and on page 2, these are just examples. You'll see that we'll provide you quarterly reports on examinations, and those are attempts. Just keep that in mind. It's not people. They're attempts. So one person can take it 10 times and fail it 10 times. So it doesn't mean that it's a different person taking it. So be aware of that as well. We have a company called PSI. They're our provider, exam provider. They've administered over 60,000 exams a year for us. We do a lot of examinations. This exam, after speaking to the predecessor exam vendor, which was Pearson VUE, speaking to them, they have told us, or they've told me directly, that they have not ever looked at the content or review those examination questions, which tells me we need to do that. And I'm gonna reach out to some of you all, because we always like to have 1 or 2 board members part of the subject matter expert group to be involved when we roll up our sleeves and look at all the questions, look at the entire bank. And we need to ask ourselves, do we need these questions in here? Do we need to change them? How do we change them? Those types of things. When we first got the barber board, I still remember this, they had a question on there that said, how many board members on the advisory board? And I'm thinking, does that make me a better barber? Knowing that? You know, we don't need those type of questions on there. So we probably will run into some of these kinds of questions that will not make that person a good code enforcement officer. So we need to visit that and visit all of the questions, and let's make sure that we have enough depth in the bank so that we're able to cycle through the bank of questions and not have the same questions being asked. Because remember, the exam is the only tool TDLR has to assess that person, whether they're qualified or not, before Dee Dee and her group issues a license. So we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So I'm going to count on some of you guys, and we'll put that application out. If you do know somebody who's should be on this subject matter expert group to review these items that's licensed, let me know, and we'll be happy to include those folks. So we want to have a sample throughout the state. We don't want everybody from Austin. You know, we got to represent. We got to look at the different cities throughout the state. And that's pretty much all I have for you guys right now. If you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
The next staff report will be for the Enforcement Division.
Madam Chair, other board members, my name is John Medlock, and I'm actually a prosecutor with the Enforcement Division. The Enforcement Division is kind of responsible for investigating and kind of resolving all the complaints that come into the department regarding the licensees or the different regulated programs that we have. And the way that the Enforcement Division is kind of set up, we're pretty much made up of investigators, attorneys, and legal assistants. We've got about 104 employees in that division. Basically, in the way we've set up the Enforcement Division, it kind of mirrors kind of the life cycle of a complaint. We've got an intake section, an investigation section, and then we have the prosecution section. In the intake section, basically kind of what they're responsible for is to basically bring in the complaints and review them to whether or not it's a case or something that we actually have jurisdiction over. If it's something that someone's complaining about that we don't have jurisdiction over, we just go ahead and close the complaint at that point. But if it's something that does allege a violation of a statute that we regulate, then we move it over to the investigation section where an investigator is assigned to the case. And they pretty much do what you would think. They review what the violations are. They talk to the different witnesses, collect evidence. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's just testimonial witnesses. And they're basically kind of a neutral fact finder. They don't try to put any of their inferences or judgments on the case because that's what the prosecutors are supposed to do. So once that comes into, they've done their review, sometimes they actually have to deal with experts to try to, sometimes if there's like, in like the AC world, there might be some more technical needs that require looking at the code. We'll bring in some AC experts to give their opinion on whether or not this was a violation, and if it was, what type of violations occurred. And once that review is completed, it'll get shifted over to the prosecutor. And what we do is we take a look at the cases, determine the level and sufficiency of the evidence, and we kind of have a couple of different things that we can do. We can either, have a formal or an informal resolution. The vast majority of the cases that we do get come with an informal resolution, whether we close it with a warning, we don't find a violation, or if we can make the consumer whole in some way or fashion, we'll go ahead and do that. And what I mean by that is sometimes by the time the case gets to us, the respondent will have either gone out and either fixed whatever the situation was, like if it's an AC and they had gone out and done an installation and something was wrong, they've maybe gone back out and fixed it. Maybe they've refunded the consumer their money. At that point in time, we're not going to turn up the state's resources to prosecute that violation because the consumer's been made whole. If it does rise to the level of a case where we have to issue a violation, we'll issue a notice of a violation, and at that point in time, the respondent has a few different options that they can do. One, they can do nothing once they get the letter, and eventually the case will go to default, and then the order will be assessed as a default order for whatever the penalty is that we assess. If they choose to engage us and respond back to us, typically, we'll settle that case with an agreed order and come to some sort of a penalty resolution, maybe a license sanction if it's appropriate, or maybe some additional continuing education if that's appropriate. The last possible resolution would be they contest the allegations and we go to a hearing. Those hearings will be held before the State Office of Administrative Hearings. They're treated just like a normal hearing you would have in a civil or criminal case. The only difference is they're heard before an administrative law judge, and there's no juries. The ALJ will review the case, and they have about 60 days to come up with, they call it, proposal for decision. And it's basically kind of their recommendation based on the weight of the evidence that they've heard and kind of their recommendation of how the case should handle. That will then go before our commission on licensing and regulation, and they'll make a final decision. So that's kind of how the life cycle of the cases happen. Regarding the complaints, they come in from about 3 different kinds of ways. We have consumer complaints, what we call departmental complaints, and then we have our criminal histories reviews. The consumer complaints are what you think they would be. It's pretty much anything from outside. It's usually typically from a consumer who's had an interaction with a licensee or somebody who purports to be a licensee. It can also be from other people in the industry, maybe complaining about something that they've seen against another person in the industry. And so if you look at some of the statistics, you'll see that we handle about 12,000 cases a year. So we're fairly busy over there. The other part is departmental complaints. Sometimes we get referrals from our licensing division, from our compliance division, education and examination. They'll all send us different, even internally, like we may be investigating a case and our investigator said, oh, here's a violation from somebody else that I need to open up a case from. The criminal history ones are the ones where all the licensees, every time that they apply or renew for a license, they do have to fill out a criminal history background. And each license type has a certain set of criminal conviction guidelines that we look at. Each program has their kind of own unique areas that are more of concern or less of concern. And later we'll actually be asking for a work group to help us develop some of those criminal conviction guidelines, because what may be important in the code enforcement may not necessarily be important to an AC contractor. So, but when we get that work group, we'll hash all those issues out. And last but not least, if you look at the kind of the statistics, you'll kind of see, like I said, we typically go through about 12,000 cases a year and resolve about that many as well. The thing that we're kind of most proud of is the date that the average time it takes to resolve one of these cases right now is about 142 days. We have been working really hard on that number, and it has steadily come down. And so basically, in less than 5 months, we can take a case from intake, from the initial complaint, all the way to a resolution with a prosecutor. So, but as you can see, and we've also kind of broke it down by kind of the percentage of where cases come from. About a third of them are consumer, 40 come from departmental referrals, and then, like I said, almost a third comes from the criminal history reviews. But that's kind of the enforcement work group in a nutshell. And like I said, we'll also be asking for an additional work group. It'll be enforcement penalty matrix work group. And kind of for you guys, what the penalty matrix is, it's kind of, we basically take all the laws and rules within your program and classify them into different levels of violations. You know, some are more serious than less serious, and we try to group like violations accordingly. What we do with that as a prosecutor, I take that when I get the case and I review it and I think it's this violation, I will refer to that penalty matrix, and so that way I know what level of violation this is and essentially what kind of penalty to assess for that violation. That penalty matrix is also published on our website, so not only does it internal document that guides the prosecutors, but it also lets the public know and the licensees know, okay, if I'm alleged to have done this, this is kind of what I can expect. And later we'll also, like I said, be asking for that work group because we kind of need you guys to let us know what is something that's more serious and something that's not as serious, because you guys are the experts in this field. So, and kind of with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions? I have a question. As far as complaints received from consumers or even departmental complaints, do you notify the supervisors or the directors or the municipality that there has been a complaint lodged against an employee? I mean, as a director of a code enforcement department, I would be more than interested in knowing that there has been a complaint that literally I was bypassed, and that would be something I would want to be aware of at bare minimum. Is there a process in place for making those types of?
I don't believe at this time. Typically, the people that get the notice are the person who filed the complaint, the person that the complaint's against. We do a quarterly. There's a statute. We send them quarterly notice saying your case is in intake or your case is in investigation, your case is with the prosecutor. As far as the other programs that we regulate, it pretty much just goes to those people. There's not a system in place that we have to notify possibly a supervisor or a boss or a city official in this case.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you.
so much. Okay, the next staff report will be on the licensing division.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Hodek, the licensing manager. And your report that you should have there on your computers is actually the overview of what Dee Dee McEachern, which is the licensing director, she went over that in the summit. If you do have any questions regarding that, I'll be happy to answer it. But I think she kind of went pretty clearly over that before. So I'm just going to basically touch on a few things that we've been doing the last several months. So, as you know, this program started November the 1st, and several of us went to DSHS for training, starting to get all the active files together, moving boxes, and all that kind of stuff. And, of course, learning how to process the code enforcement officer licenses, as well as reviewing the applications. My two team leads are doing a great job and also did a great job with helping in that process. We also, DSHS also extended renewals for 90 days, and that was from October, November, and December, and that helped reduce the demand for services as well as preventing any problems that may have occurred in the transition. Prior to the meeting, I passed out the licensing division report. So this is basically what I'm going to be presenting to you at each advisory board meeting. And I will have the number of new registrations issued, the ones that were online, renewed licenses, as well as the total population. This report, of course, was only for the month of November to December. So far we've issued 20 code enforcement officer new registrations and 22 code enforcement officer in training registrations. That pretty much concludes my report. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And by the way, that 90-day extension was really helpful. I think that was critical and instrumental in making for a much smoother transition and took away some of the worry that people had about their license renewals that were coming up right at the time that we were transitioning to TDLR.
Right.
So
So
that was a really great move. Whoever thought of it,
That was the
kudos.
DSHS folks, and
Okay.
so, you know, we were happy to oblige with that, so
Yeah.
luckily it did work out.
It was a great
So,
suggestion.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item is going to be a discussion and overview of Administrative Rules 16, Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 62.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Doug Jennings, and Assistant General Counsel for the department. My discussion for item F, I'll try to keep it fairly brief. We want to respect your time today and not have a 7-hour meeting. So what I'd really like to discuss is the process through which our department brought over the rules governing this program from the Department of State Health Services. As you know, there are two major sources of guidance that determine how the program will work, and that's the statute and the rules. The statute really paints in broad strokes. It sets out just kind of some very, very general parameters, and the rules fill in all the detail. Our goal for bringing the rules from DSHS to TDLR was not to alter your understanding of the substance of the rules in any way, to provide a very clear and consistent path that's not different from what you would have seen at DSHS. However, we always here at TDLR like to have very clear rules. We like to have a particular kind of organization for our rules. And we believe in economy in terms of word count. And so one of the things that you might notice immediately on looking at TDLR's rules is that they're short. We cut out about half of the wordage, of the verbiage from the DSHS rules. Now, we can't take 100% credit for that. A lot of the provisions that were in the DSHS rules we were able to throw out because they're already covered by other chapters of TDLR's general rules. So things like how we handle complaints, how we give people credit for military service, things like that, we were actually just able to delete those because we already have those things covered, and they were, in our rules, they're already equivalent to what you would have seen in the DSHS rules. But we did reorganize the rules, and we tried to make them a little clearer. There were some sections that we did not touch. For example, continuing education, those provisions, we did not want to touch those. There, I think we may have added a little bit of language, but for the most part, those rules are identical to what you saw at DSHS before. And the reason is we just, once again, we wanted this transition to be very smooth. We didn't want to alter anyone's understanding of what they had to do to renew their license. Especially, that could just be a really stressful time, and we wanted to make that as easy as possible. In your materials, you've got some rules. You've got a copy of the new rules, and you also have a cross-reference table. One of the things I think you'll note is that under substantive changes and additional notes, you will see that we didn't make that many substantive changes. As I repeat constantly, you know, our goal was to make sure that the rules were equivalent in substance, but they do look very different. But I'd like to show you some of the things, some of the substantive changes that we did make. And I just have three because we really didn't make that many changes in terms of substance. Number one, we removed the limit on renewing code enforcement officer in training registration. I think DSHS limited it to one renewal, and we just came up, while brainstorming, we came up with some possible scenarios in which that might not be fair to a registrant who comes down with a sudden illness, serious illness. So we removed that. But we also know from experience, from experience from our DSHS former employees, is that that is not an in-training registration is not something someone wants to hold on to for a long time. So we're not really worried about that really affecting the registration structure. Additionally, we removed a penalty for failing an exam multiple times and reduced the fees for registration and renewal. And people were happy to hear that. But I invite you to look at the substantive changes and additional notes. Generally, you will see something that says this: the rule has been rewritten, restructured, and moved to new TDLR Rule X. And that was just our general philosophy. And you'll notice, this may not be of great interest to you, but it is to us, is that we try to provide a format, a numbering format that is consistent across many of our programs. So we know that whether you're looking at the sanitarian's rules or the code enforcement officer's rules, you'll generally know that subsection 62.10 is going to be definitions, that point 20 are going to have the eligibility requirements, that point 80 is going to contain the fee language. And so that's just, so somebody who's familiar with multiple programs will know where to go. Any questions about the rules or how we translated them to the TDLR format? All right, thank you. Madam Chair, if I may I discuss the possible work groups?
That would be great, and since that's the next agenda item.
Thank you. As Mr. Medlock discussed, well, let me give some background first. We're going to ask you today to form 3 separate work groups, and they will all have some distinct tasks. And we facilitate all the work group meetings. We're looking at maybe membership of 3 or 4 committee members per work group. We facilitate those meetings. We'll call you. We'll figure out your schedule, what works for you. We'll do it by teleconference, just to make it easier for everybody. But what we're looking at is, as I told you, bringing the rules over, we tried not to alter the substance. So now is the time that we can begin looking at the substance of the rules and figure out if any changes need to be made. One of the first tasks we'll need to do is for the enforcement work group. And as Mr. Medlock mentioned, we'll need to make some recommendations regarding which crimes are related to the occupation of code enforcement officers, and we'll also need to come up with a penalty matrix. Now, Mr. Medlock or another enforcement attorney will help you. I'll probably be present in those meetings, but they will guide you on that process. And as Mr. Medlock mentioned, some crimes, depending on the program, may bar you from becoming a registrant or a licensee for that program, at least for a certain amount of time. For example, some of the other programs I work with are electricians and air conditioning and refrigeration contractors. You can imagine that if someone has a conviction for burglary or a physical assault of some kind, when those licensees have access to people's homes and property, that's a concern. And so you'll engage in that analysis and figure out which crimes relate to this profession. And then also make recommendations regarding the penalty matrix. So that's the first work group. The second work group will be looking at the rules almost generally, at the licensure requirements, maybe things like supervision. We noticed, and we got some comments during the public comment period, that some of the supervision provisions may not really reflect what happens in reality. I know that we have a form. The rules deal with a form for someone who is a CEO in training. What if that person has multiple supervisors? Just kind of practical day-to-day things. We want to make sure that our rules match what is actually happening in practice. And lastly, we'd like to ask you to appoint a education and examination work group. I alluded to the CE, the continuing education rules earlier. The wording of the continuing education rule, in my opinion, is not really optimal. I don't think it is very clear, and I don't think it necessarily reflects the way that we are handling continuing education. The rules speak of requiring approval, and it's unclear whether that's kind of an affirmative approval or an automatic approval, whether if you meet criteria A through D, you are approved, or whether you actually need to submit something to us and we say you are approved. And those are things that could be clearer in the rules. And obviously you'll have some interaction with Mr. Pizarro about the examination, and so he'll probably sit in on those meetings also. Madam Chair, I'd ask that we have no more than 4 members per work group. 3 is perfectly fine, 3 or 4, so your discretion. But
Mary Winston, TDLR. Also, Madam Chair, we have some open seats currently we have a commission meeting tomorrow where some of those seats may be filled. So you can appoint as many as 4, but if you want to appoint 3 and leave a couple of open slots, that's fine as well, because there leaves some availability for new people coming on the board.
Absolutely, and we'll want them to have the opportunity to be engaged, so yes, we will do that. So at this time, what I would like to do is we'll just start with you, Crystala, and I'll kind of survey or canvass the committee and see which ones you're actually interested in serving on. I mean, everyone has their passion, and so do you have a preference as far as which work group you would like to participate in?
Well, actually, I do. The preference would be the education and examination work group.
Okay.
That would be my first preference. The second one would be, of course, because of the background, is the enforcement recommendations for the criminals and the penalties.
Okay, very good. That's your second choice, and the education and exam is your first?
Yes.
Okay. Matthew?
The education and examination first, and then second choice would be rules general.
The licensing group? Okay.
I'll go with education, first choice, license, rules in general, second, and then enforcement.
Madam Chair, can you repeat that?
I will. Let me write them down first. Okay, so Richard's first choice was educational exam group. His second option was the licensing group, and his third option was the enforcement group, which I have my notes, and I'll provide these to you so that you can include those in the meeting minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Jennifer?
Yes, ma'am. The education and examination will be my first. And second will be the licensing group.
Stuart?
Well, to be different, since I'm last, and that's the way I would have picked it, I'll go enforcement work group first, licensing second, and education third.
All right, very good.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Carla James, if you would like to take a few moments, we can go into our executive committee conference room and lay it out and assist you with the assignments, and everyone else can take a few-minute break.
Okay, if you'd like to do that, I think that's a good idea. So,
Gavel us out.
call the meeting back to order at 1:53 p.m. And so our next order of business is to assign each of the committee members work groups. And so I'm going to go on and read into the record the assignments. And if you have any questions, then please feel free to ask. The first work group is the enforcement work group. Committee members assigned to that work group are Crystal Miles and Stuart Walker. The second work group is the licensing work group. Those assigned to that work group are Richard Adams, Stuart Walker, Matthew Christensen. The last work group is the education and examination work group, and those assigned to that work group are Jennifer Bernal, Matthew Christensen, and myself, Teresa Adrian. The rest of the positions, we will remain vacant, and hopefully we will be able to fill those positions with some of the newly appointed committee members. So we're
Madam
excited
Chair?
to hear about that
Yes.
tomorrow.
Mary Winston, for the work groups, because we've had other boards ask, you don't have to reach out to us, we will reach out to you. Staff will reach out, the meetings, I don't know if we said it earlier, are by phone, travel's not necessary, unless you want to come in, and then we can all sit around and see each other. For different groups, we'll have different time frames. You know, John talked about enforcement and what's going to take place. It's going to be pretty quick, right? The meetings are going to be sooner than others. For E&E, we have things that we're going to work on with the rules. We're going to work on those tests as our Director Ray talked about earlier, and that's going to be subject matter experts, not necessarily this work group. So thank you all for volunteering. The new members, you've graciously left some spots open for when those are appointed, and they can join the party.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. And, you know, to that point, you know, we definitely want to be available to you as subject matter experts. And, you know, committee members, please do refer names to Ray so that in the event that he has a need for, you know, someone to serve as a resource to him, he has that list readily available. So if you know of anybody in the industry, please send him that information.
One additional thing, Mary Winston again, our enforcement analytics person just made a sign to me. This was the sign he made. And this means no walking quorum. So we have some crossover on these lists. We are not to get together to discuss in my work group this, and we've had that training. So we were all at the summit, yay. So we know what to do, but as he made this, when you go into your meetings, just remember Chris Rusty doing this. No walking quorums. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so the next agenda item is H, and that will be recommendations for future agenda items at our next advisory committee meeting. And so with that said, do we have any items that anyone wants to recommend?
Madam Chair, Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. I would just recommend as some items for our next agenda would be reports from the various work groups. So I would imagine for the enforcement group, we'll have not only a report from that work group, but also possible approval of a penalty matrix and maybe criminal conviction guidelines. The other two work groups, I would imagine, would just make a report and maybe some suggestions as to future rulemaking, but I don't know if we'll have anything specific to vote on at that point. But those are three potential items.
Okay, I think those are great suggestions.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay. And so the next item is I, discussion of a date, time, and location for our next advisory meeting.
Madam Chair, Nick Bowinas. After talking with Doug, he suggests that we meet sometime in May.
Okay.
And if you'd like to keep those meetings that next meeting on a Thursday, we have 3 dates available for you. May 3rd, 10th, and 17th. So they're all Thursdays. And if you'd like to keep it at 1, or we could do it in the morning, or whatever's more convenient for you.
Okay, and so my question would be to Christine is, do we have to make that decision today, or can we coordinate via email and figure out the best time slot for the committee?
You can coordinate through email
So that we
with
can
Christine.
look at our
That'd be fine.
calendars? Okay.
You bet.
Then we'll do that if the committee is good with that approach.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Madam Chair. I believe Christine will reach out to each member individually rather than being a group discussion, as we know those are bad outside of a public notice meeting. So that's how we'll handle it. So sounds.
You'll hear from her within the week. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one final, not final, if you want to continue going, you have that gavel. Please know, if you have any other agenda items in the meantime, contact Christine, advisory.boards@tdlr.texas.gov, and we can get that on the next agenda. So this isn't the end of it. If we do have work to do prior to this next meeting, and we have items, but if there are other items that come up in between that time, please let us know.
Okay. In committee, those items would be any that you come up with, that you think of, or that someone recommends to you. I do have one that someone has approached me about, and I want to go back and review their request first before I bring that one forward, and I will send it to you via email. Okay? All right. So if there is nothing else, I will propose that we adjourn this meeting today, and it is 59 minutes into this meeting. And so I will use the gavel one more time and adjourn the meeting.